There are mirrors you should never look into alone, not because they are haunted by spirits, but because they reflect a truth too heavy for the unguarded heart. These mirrors do not hang on walls. They hang in memory, in conscience, in the quiet corners of the mind where the soul keeps what the ego refuses to see. They are not made of glass, but of awareness. And when you gaze into them long enough, they do not show you your face. They show you your motives. The modern world worships reflection. We polish our images like idols, curating fragments of ourselves for others to adore. Yet the more we adore the image, the further we drift from the substance. We have traded the mystery of being known by God for the illusion of being seen by men. We call it authenticity, but it is performance. We call it connection, but it is display. And behind every smiling photograph and perfect prayer post, there lies a trembling question. Who am I when no one is watching? C.S. Lewis once wrote that the most dangerous thing about pride is not that it makes us boastful, but that it makes us forgetful of our need for grace, forgetful of our dependence on something higher than ourselves. Pride builds mirrors everywhere, but never windows. And so we live surrounded by reflections of our own making, mistaking their shimmer for light. That is the first haunted mirror, the mirror of vanity. It whispers that your worth depends on visibility. It tells you that if no one notices your goodness, it does not exist. It teaches you to pray with one eye on the crowd. The haunting of vanity is not loud. It is subtle, polite, civilized. It wears ambition as virtue, self-expression as freedom. It convinces you that humility is weakness and that applause is affirmation. You begin to shape your life not around truth, but around perception. And the tragedy of it is that the more attention you gain, the emptier you become. For the applause of men can echo, but it cannot fill. The soul, made in the image of an infinite God, cannot be satisfied by finite praise. And so you chase validation like a thirst that no water can quench. But when the lights go out and the room falls silent, that mirror becomes terrifying. You see the reflection of someone who has forgotten how to be unseen. You realize that you have mistaken attention for affection and performance for purpose. The haunting laughter you hear in that mirror is not the devil's, it is your own. For every idol eventually mocks its worshipper, and the only way to break its spell is to look away, to remember that your reflection is not your identity. The second haunted mirror waits quietly beside it, the mirror of hypocrisy. This mirror does not lie. It tells too much truth. It shows the distance between what you say and what you do, between what you proclaim and what you pursue. It shows the sermon that was meant for others, but is secretly addressed to you. The most frightening thing about hypocrisy is that it begins as sincerity. You wanted to do good. You wanted to serve. But somewhere along the way, righteousness became reputation. Holiness became a costume you wore to feel safe in a world that rewards the well-behaved. The hypocrite does not set out to deceive. He sets out to protect himself from judgment. But the longer he wears the mask, the more it grows into his skin. He forgets which parts of him are costume and which are real. He learns to imitate passion, to rehearse compassion, to cry on cue. And though the world may praise his consistency, God weeps for his confinement. For the soul was never meant to live behind glass. It was made to be seen, not staged. When you dare to face that mirror, you will find no monster, only a frightened child, one who believed that love could only be earned through performance. Do not shatter the mirror in shame. Kneel before it. Weep before it. Let the mask crack slowly until light seeps through. For the end of hypocrisy is not disgrace. It is liberation. To be free is not to be flawless, but to be honest. The liar's punishment is not hell. It is loneliness. And the only exorcism strong enough to cleanse that mirror is truth spoken first to yourself, then to the world. The third haunted mirror is darker still, the mirror of greed. This one does not reflect your face. It reflects your hunger. Look too long, and you will see all that you have gained and still desire. It will show you the house that grew larger as your heart grew smaller, the possessions that multiplied as your peace diminished. It will whisper to you that you are almost enough, if only you had a little more. And as you stare, you begin to notice something. Your reflection is starving, even as your hands overflow. Greed is not about money. It is about control. It is the desperate attempt to make eternity measurable, to turn the boundless into something we can count. We call it ambition, progress, even stewardship. But deep down, it is fear that if we stop accumulating, we will disappear. The devil does not tempt us with evil as much as with abundance. He tells us that to love life, we must own it. And so we collect moments, people, even faith itself, as possessions. But you cannot own what was meant to be received. C.S. Lewis warned that hell is the place where everyone insists on having their own way. Greed is the practice of hell on earth. It teaches us to hoard not only wealth, but opinion, influence, forgiveness. We become misers of mercy. We calculate compassion. And when we die, we leave behind everything except what we refuse to give. The haunting in this mirror is not the face of a ghost. It is the emptiness of a soul that has mistaken gain for growth. If you ever dare to stand before it, remember this. The only way to defeat greed is gratitude. Gratitude redefines ownership. It reminds you that nothing you possess is truly yours, not your talent, not your time, not even your next breath. Everything is on loan from eternity, and gratitude is the interest paid to heaven. When you live that way, the mirror of greed loses its grip. The reflection that once demanded more begins to smile, finally satisfied with enough. But there is another mirror that waits in the corner, one that no one wants to face, the mirror of shame. This one does not flatter. It accuses. It reflects not the image you show the world, but the one you hide from it. It shows the failures you refuse to name, the desires you have condemned yourself for, the moments you wish could be undone. Shame is the cruelest of the mirrors because it tells half the truth. It shows you what you did, but never what you are. Many live their entire lives imprisoned by this reflection. They cannot forgive themselves, so they spend their days performing atonement. They build reputations to outrun their memories, but the mirror always follows. It hangs in the mind like a ghost that refuses to leave. And every time they dare to hope, shame whispers, "You don't deserve joy." Every time they find love, shame murmurs, "If they knew you, they would leave." But listen closely. Shame is not the voice of God. It is the echo of the fall. Conviction invites you home. Shame locks you outside. Conviction says, "You have done wrong. Return to me." Shame says, "You are wrong. There is no return." The first is a door. The second, a wall. To look into this mirror and survive, you must bring with you one truth. There is no sin strong enough to make you unrecognizable to God. You can distort His image, but you cannot erase it. The light that made you still burns beneath your scars. The moment you accept that, the reflection changes. The eyes that once looked accusingly now look redeemed. The fifth mirror gleams deceptively bright, the mirror of fear. It does not show what is, but what might be. It projects failure onto the future and regret onto the past. It convinces you that the safest way to live is not to live at all. Fear has haunted humanity longer than sin, for fear is the soil where sin grows. It is fear that makes the greedy hoard, the proud pretend, the hypocrite hide. It is fear that makes the believer doubt that grace could still be for them. The most dangerous thing about fear is that it feels responsible. It disguises itself as caution, as wisdom, as maturity. But in truth, it is worship of control, and control is the great enemy of faith. You cannot hold the hand of God while clinging to the illusion of certainty. Faith is not the absence of fear, it is the decision to trust despite it. To walk toward the dark mirror and believe that what stands behind it is not punishment, but presence. When you finally confront fear, you will find that it was never guarding danger. It was guarding growth. Beyond every fear is a truth waiting to free you. Beyond every terror, a tenderness. The moment you face it, the glass cracks, and what looked like a prison becomes a passage. And finally, the sixth haunted mirror, the mirror of the self, the most beautiful and the most dangerous. This one does not reflect you as you are, but as you wish to be flawless, admired, complete. It is the mirror that makes you your own God. It is the gospel of self without the grace of surrender. It teaches you that salvation is self-improvement, that you can perfect yourself through willpower, through knowledge, through achievement. But the soul that worships itself becomes its own executioner, for the self cannot bear the weight of divinity. Look long enough into this mirror, and you will see it shatter under the pressure of your own expectations. Perfection is not holiness. It is pride in disguise. You do not ascend to heaven by polishing your image. You are raised there by the humility to let yourself be loved. God does not wait for your reflection to be worthy. He waits for your heart to be honest. When you finally step away from that last mirror, you will realize that none of them were cursed. They were simply revealing what was already haunting you. Vanity, hypocrisy, greed, shame, fear, self-worship. These are not demons in glass. They are shadows of the soul. And every time you face them with truth instead of denial, they lose their power. The haunting ends not by smashing the mirror, but by stepping through it. And on the other side there is light, not the blinding light of perfection, but the soft, merciful glow of becoming real. You begin to see yourself not as a project to fix, but as a story still being written. The author has not abandoned his manuscript. Every line of regret can still become redemption. Every reflection, however distorted, can still bear his image. So do not be afraid to look, but never look alone. Carry grace with you, and the mirrors will no longer be haunted, they will be holy. There is something sacred about what happens when a person finally learns to see without illusion. The mirrors that once terrified them become thresholds, and the reflections that once accused them become teachers. What we call haunted was never supernatural at all. It was the ghost of the unexamined self, whispering through the glass, "Remember me." For what haunts us most is not what we have seen, but what we have refused to see. The truest horror in life is not the darkness that surrounds us, but the blindness that grows within us. And when the light finally returns, when the eyes of the heart open again, the same mirrors that once reflected fear now reflect forgiveness. C.S. Lewis once said that hell is a state of mind, and heaven is the act of waking from it. Every mirror we have faced was part of that awakening. Vanity, hypocrisy, greed, shame, fear, and self-worship. These are not 6 demons of superstition, but 6 dimensions of one prison, the ego cut off from grace. Each mirror was a wall in that prison. But when you faced them honestly, the walls turned into doors. And now the final journey begins, the walk beyond mirrors, into the world itself. For what use is clarity if it does not lead to compassion? What use is self-knowledge if it does not blossom into service? The purpose of all reflection is resurrection not of the ego, but of love. To look inward only to remain there is to drown in your own depth. To look inward and return with mercy for the world, that is wisdom. The one who has seen their own shadow can finally forgive the shadows of others. The one who has stood naked before truth can finally clothe others in understanding. It is a humbling thing, this new sight. You begin to notice the mirrors everywhere, not just in your mind, but in the faces around you. You see the woman polishing her beauty into identity, the man performing goodness for applause, the rich drowning in possessions that cannot buy peace. You see the haunted eyes of the ambitious, the guarded smiles of the ashamed, the quiet despair of those who worship the self and find no God there. And your first instinct may be to condemn. But now you know better, for you have seen that every mirror reflects the same hunger, the longing to be known, to be enough, to be free. The gift of the awakened soul is empathy without compromise. You do not excuse evil, but you understand its roots. You know that corruption begins not in monstrous hearts, but in frightened ones. You recognize that greed is just fear with a suit on, that vanity is loneliness dressed for attention, that hypocrisy is sincerity terrified of rejection. And so you begin to love the sinner, not because you deny the sin, but because you remember the mirror. You remember what it was like to stand there trembling, caught between despair and deliverance. To live this way is to become yourself a mirror, but not a haunted one, a clear one, the kind that reflects truth without distortion. Wherever you go, your presence begins to expose falsehood, not by accusation, but by authenticity. People feel the weight of your honesty and start to remove their masks. They speak more softly, listen more deeply, forgive more quickly. The light that passed through you begins to awaken others, and what once was private revelation becomes public renewal. This, then, is how God redeems even the haunted things. He does not destroy the mirror. He cleanses it. He does not erase the past. He transfigures it. Every scar becomes a reflection of where the light entered. Every wound becomes a window. Every failure becomes an invitation to grace. What once disfigured you now distinguishes you not as broken, but as human. For holiness is not the absence of imperfection. It is the presence of honesty about it. We were never meant to live mirrorless. We were meant to see clearly. But the mirrors were never meant to be idols. They are instruments, temporary tools for revelation. The goal is not to remain staring at yourself, endlessly analyzing, but to recognize the reflection and move through it toward relationship. For beyond every true mirror waits a person, not a concept, not a creed, but the living presence who made you in his image and has been patiently waiting for you to notice that the image was always his. And when you finally look into his gaze, you realize it was never you who were looking at him, but he who had been looking at you all along. His reflection in you was the reason the mirrors called you back. Even the haunted ones were longing to return to light. Every fear, every vanity, every grief was a distorted form of divine desire. What you thought was haunting was actually homesickness, the cry of the soul that remembered heaven without knowing how to name it. So the work now is simple. Do not flee the mirrors, and do not worship them. Walk past them. Carry what they have taught you into the world, that every act of your day, every conversation, every moment of silence, every choice between truth and convenience become a continuation of that seeing. To live awake is to live accountable, to live transparent, to live luminous. It is to refuse to let darkness have the final word, even when it speaks softly through comfort or distraction. The age we live in will keep trying to build new mirrors, brighter, louder, smarter. They will call them technologies, ideologies, philosophies. They will promise to show you your best self. And once again, people will gather around their glowing reflections, calling it progress. But you who have seen behind the glass must remember the brightest screens still cast shadows. The more perfect the image, the more it hides the truth. Do not despise the world, for this love it enough to stay real in it. Be the presence that reminds others there is more to see than themselves. For when enough people begin to see clearly, the haunting ends not just for individuals, but for civilization. Whole cultures can awaken from vanity, hypocrisy, greed, shame, fear, and self-worship. They can learn again to build windows instead of mirrors windows through which light can pass both ways. This is what redemption looks like at scale. Not miracles in the sky, but men and women who have learned to reflect truth gently into one another's lives. And maybe at the end of time, when all mirrors are broken and only love remains, we will finally understand that every reflection was an invitation, every haunted image a lesson, every ghost a guide, for even in our blindness, grace was at work, transforming every distortion into direction, every wound into wisdom. We were never alone in front of those mirrors. The one we feared was beside us all along, not judging, but redeeming. So, if you ever find yourself standing before a mirror that frightens you, whether it is vanity or shame, fear or greed, do not look away. Look deeper. Look until you see not yourself, but the light moving beneath your reflection. And when you see it, do not run. Smile, for that light is not yours, it is his. And where his light is, nothing remains haunted for long. There is one more thing that must be said before the lights fade and the voice falls silent. It is this. Every mirror that frightened you was also a promise. The promise that even what terrifies you about yourself can become the place of transformation. The haunted mirrors were never about fear. They were about freedom. For to see oneself truly is to become capable of change. And the one thing darkness cannot tolerate is transformation. What the shadows fear most is not exposure, but redemption. You see, reflection is not the end of faith, it is the beginning of it. The true miracle is not when the mirror shows you perfection, but when it reveals imperfection, and you still dare to love what you see, because you now see it through God's eyes. The power of grace is that it does not erase the image. It restores it. It does not rewrite your story. It redeems its meaning. It does not deny the past. It resurrects it into purpose. We speak often of salvation as escape, as flight from corruption, as an upward motion toward a better realm. But salvation is not escape. It is encounter. It is the light that enters the room you swore you'd never return to. It is the love that sits beside your guilt and calls you beloved anyway. It is the moment you stop pretending to be the person you think God could love and realize he already loved the person you truly are. That is when the haunting ends, because you finally see that even the darkness within you is known, and yet you are still chosen. If you were to walk through the world now, you would see that every soul carries its own set of mirrors. Some carry them proudly, polishing their reflections to convince the world they are unbreakable. Others hide theirs, terrified of what a single glimpse might expose. Some shatter theirs in rebellion, declaring, I need no mirror, no truth, no God. And yet the shards still follow them, reflecting fragments of light through their denial. None can escape reflection. We can only choose what kind of mirror we will be. So ask yourself, will you be haunted glass or holy glass? Will you reflect only yourself, or will you allow light to pass through you? For if you let the light through, you will stop being the mirror and become the window. You will no longer be obsessed with your reflection. You will become a conduit of revelation. The world has enough mirrors. It needs windows It needs souls transparent enough for God to be seen through them. The journey of faith is not the removal of mirrors, but their purification. Vanity becomes vision when humility enters. Hypocrisy becomes honesty when confession is made. Greed becomes generosity when gratitude takes root. Shame becomes testimony when forgiveness is accepted. Fear becomes courage when trust is chosen. And self-worship becomes worship when the self bows before truth. What once haunted now heals. What once condemned now calls you home. And in that moment, that quiet, trembling moment when you realize you are both haunted and holy, the world changes color. The light seems sharper, the air more alive. It is not that the world has changed, but that you have. The eyes that once sought validation now see beauty. The heart that once trembled with fear now beats with reverence. The hands that once grasped for control now open to give. You begin to live not as one avoiding mirrors, but as one carrying light into them. To live like this is to live awake, to see through illusion and still choose love. It is to know that every person you meet is fighting a war. You cannot see a war against their own haunted reflections, and therefore to offer compassion instead of judgment. It is to forgive, not because they deserve it, but because you remember how it felt to need it. It is to build community, not around agreement, but around grace. C.S. Lewis said that humility is not thinking less of yourself, but thinking of yourself less. That is the secret to unhaunted living. The more you love beyond yourself, the less your reflection can control you. Love is the great exorcist. It casts out fear, pride, greed, and shame. For love alone can look into the mirror and not flinch. Love alone can see the truth and not despair. Love alone can walk through the valley of reflection and emerge radiant. So let the mirrors remain. Let them show what they must show. But do not stand there paralyzed by the image. Step forward. Step through. Beyond reflection lies revelation. And beyond revelation lies relationship. You were not created to worship the image of yourself, but to recognize the image of God reflected through you. That image, once glimpsed, becomes your compass. You will stumble, fall, doubt, forget, but that light will not abandon you, for grace does not demand perfection. It demands presence. And so, in the end, when you have walked through all 6 mirrors and learned what they had to teach, when you have faced vanity with humility, hypocrisy with truth, greed with gratitude, shame with mercy, fear with trust, and self-worship with surrender, you will understand that the mirrors were never enemies. They were sacraments disguised as struggle. They were the holy glass through which eternity trained you to see. The world will not understand this transformation. It will still chase the surface, polish its images, and sell its reflection. But you will walk quietly among them, carrying a stillness that speaks louder than all noise. You will not need to condemn, for your peace will convict. You will not need to preach, for your presence will persuade. You will not need to prove, for the light within you will do the work. And one day, when you catch your reflection again in a window, a lake, or the eyes of another, you will notice something miraculous. You will not see the haunted face you once feared, nor the perfect face you once performed. You will see a familiar gentleness, a quiet radiance, a trace of eternity smiling back. And you will realize this is what it means to be human, not flawless, but faithful, not stainless, but shining. For heaven does not demand you be unbroken. It only asks that you be transparent enough for light to pass through. Every scar becomes a lens. Every crack becomes a cathedral window. And in the end, when the mirrors of this world fade into dust, what remains is not the reflection, but the light, And you will know, finally and forever, that you were never meant to fear the mirrors. You were meant to become the light they were reflecting all along. And perhaps this is where all sermons truly end, not with applause, not with triumph, but with stillness. For the heart that has looked into all its mirrors and lived to tell the truth no longer needs to chase certainty. It has found peace in mystery. The final revelation of every spiritual journey is not understanding, but awe. Awe that light could endure so patiently within darkness. Awe that mercy could reach so far into the forgotten corners of the soul. Awe that the very God we feared was the one holding the mirror steady all along, not to condemn us, but to remind us, you are still mine. When C.S. Lewis spoke of heaven, he never described it as an escape, but as the ultimate reality, the place where everything false finally falls away. Perhaps this is what it means to be redeemed, not that our scars disappear, but that they are finally seen in the right light. The haunted mirrors of life were not curses, they were preparations for that sight. Each one trained the eyes of the heart to recognize truth, to hunger for what cannot decay, to remember what cannot be sold. For the soul that has faced its own reflection has already glimpsed eternity. The great irony of human existence is that we spend our lives afraid of seeing ourselves when all of heaven is trying to show us who we truly are. We avoid stillness because it threatens to expose what we fear to acknowledge, that we are not gods, and that this is good news. For the moment we stop pretending to be infinite, we begin to experience infinity not as possession, but as participation. The self that once demanded to be worshipped can finally relax into being loved. The chase ends. The haunting ceases. Imagine for a moment standing before the divine mirror, not the mirrors of vanity or fear, but the mirror of perfect love. In that reflection, you would see every truth at once, your flaws and your beauty, your failures and your courage, your shame and your sacredness, all held in one gaze that does not flinch. That gaze would undo you and remake you in the same breath. And then you would understand that judgment was never about punishment. It was about clarity. The fire of heaven does not burn to destroy, it burns to reveal. And if you can understand that now, here, while the world still distracts and distorts, then you have already begun to live as one who is free. Free not because the mirrors are gone, but because you are no longer afraid of what they might show. Free because you have learned that grace is stronger than reflection. Free because you have remembered that you are loved not for what you reflect, but for who you are when no reflection remains. So let this be your quiet prayer as you leave this moment and return to the noise of the world. May I never be afraid to see myself truthfully, and may I never see myself apart from you. For to see yourself apart from God is despair, but to see yourself within his gaze is redemption. Every act of honesty becomes worship. Every act of love becomes prophecy. The world changes not when we invent new truths, but when we finally live the ones we have always known. There will be days when you forget again, when the mirrors call you back with their seductive promises of importance and control. You will be tempted to look, to measure, to compare. But if you listen closely, you will hear a softer voice behind them, the one that speaks not in flattery or fear, but in quiet affection. You are more than this reflection. You were made for light. And in that moment, you will smile, not because the struggle is over, but because it has become holy. You will realize that life itself is a pilgrimage of reflection. Every encounter another mirror, every choice another chance to choose truth over illusion, humility over pride, love over fear. You will realize that the mirrors were never the destination. They were the teachers along the road. At the end of that road, There will be no mirrors left, only light. Not the light that blinds, but the light that welcomes. It will not demand explanation. It will offer embrace. You will not stand before it as a performer awaiting critique, but as a child returning home. And when you finally step into that eternal light, you will see that all along, every haunted mirror was only reflecting one face, his. For every vanity was a longing to be beautiful in his sight. Every hypocrisy was a fear of losing his approval. Every greed was a hunger for his abundance. Every shame was a cry for his forgiveness. Every fear was a mistrust of his plan. Every self-worship was a misunderstanding of his image. All of it, even the darkest parts, were shadows cast by love misunderstood. And now that you understand, the haunting becomes harmony. The mirrors no longer accuse. They sing, the reflections align, the fragments form a pattern, and what once looked like chaos reveals itself as grace in disguise. The story that began in fear ends in wonder. So, if ever again you find yourself standing before a mirror, physical or invisible, do not rush to turn away. Stand there. Breathe. Remember. You are looking not at an enemy, but at a mystery, the intersection of dust and divinity. You are the vessel through which the infinite chose to see itself. And if that truth doesn't humble you, it has not yet healed you. Now, walk. Leave the mirrors behind and carry their lessons forward. Be a reflection of the light that saved you. When others look into your eyes, may they not see perfection, but peace. When they encounter your presence, may they sense a stillness that feels like home. When they hear your words, may they recognize the echo of something eternal. For that is the purpose of all reflection, not to glorify the mirror, but to magnify the light. And when the day comes that all the mirrors of this world finally shatter, when the illusions fall and the light fills everything, may it find you ready, not terrified of truth, but in love with it. For the mirrors will pass away, but the light will remain. And you, beloved soul, were always meant to belong to that light. And yet, even after all that light, the lesson deepens, because awakening does not mean the end of reflection. It means that every reflection becomes an opportunity for reverence. When you have seen the haunted mirrors for what they are, you do not run from them anymore. You learn to walk among them, to recognize them in the laughter of strangers and the quiet exhaustion of friends, in the ambition that drives cities and the sorrow that hides behind success. You begin to see how the same struggle breathes in everyone, how all the world, in its fever and its longing, is simply trying to remember its face in God. The market, the classroom, the stage, the street, each one a hall of mirrors. And yet, because you have looked into the dark ones, you can move through them without losing yourself. You do not have to tear them down. You only have to keep your eyes on the light. For once you have found the true center, no reflection can trap you. You have learned that the secret is not to destroy the image, but to love through it. When you love, the mirror ceases to be a surface. It becomes a window, and through that window, the world looks different. Every person becomes a glimpse of eternity. Every conversation a possibility of healing. The ones you once judged become mirrors of your former blindness. The ones who judge you become reminders of your own pride. The circle completes itself. You discover that to forgive others is to forgive the parts of yourself that once resembled them. You learn that mercy is not approval, it is understanding, and understanding is the beginning of peace. There will still be nights when the old reflections return, when vanity whispers, when greed pulls, when fear crouches by the door. But you will meet them with a gentleness they cannot comprehend. You will say, "Ah, I know you. You are the shadows of love unlearned. Come in. Let me listen." And by the act of naming them without hatred, you will rob them of power. The demons of the mirror cannot survive hospitality. That is what grace really is not a spell that erases sin, but a love that refuses to run from it. Grace stays. Grace looks. Grace listens until even the ghost believes it can live again. That is why the incarnation mattered, because God himself stepped into the mirror, took on the reflection, bore the distortions, and broke them from within. The divine became the haunted, so that the haunted might become divine. And from that day on, every mirror carried a memory of redemption. So, when you pass by your reflection now, see if you can glimpse him there, not as condemnation, but as companionship. The one who stands beside you in the mirror is not there to measure your progress. He is there to remind you that the work was never about progress, but about presence. Perfection is not a requirement. It is a horizon. The point is not to reach it, but to walk toward it with honesty. The one who walks humbly walks already in heaven's direction. And as you walk, the world will notice not your perfection, but your peace. They will not know why they feel lighter around you. They will not understand why your silence comforts them. They will think you wise, but you will know it is not wisdom, only the absence of pretense. You will carry the quiet joy of someone who has made peace with their reflection, and in that peace others will begin to find their own. For in the end, salvation spreads not through argument, but through atmosphere. Light travels quietly, and truth persuades best when it is lived. The sermon continues not on pulpits, but in kitchens and offices and late-night conversations between tired souls. It speaks through kindness that costs you something, through forgiveness that astonishes the undeserving, through patience that refuses to rush grace. That is how the haunting ends, not in thunder, but in tenderness. And maybe one day someone will look into your eyes and see that same light that once looked through you. They will not know its name, but they will feel at home in its warmth. They will ask you, "How did you find peace?" And you will smile and say, "I stopped running from my mirrors." And in that confession, a new mirror will awaken in them, and the light will spread again. This is the endless rhythm of redemption, reflection, recognition, restoration. 1,000 mirrors healed by one light passing through each of them. And the miracle is that the light never dims, no matter how many reflections it inhabits. For the divine does not decrease by being shared. It multiplies. Every soul that accepts it becomes another facet of eternity, another portal through which heaven looks at the world. So let the world have its haunted mirrors. You have learned the art of seeing through them. When fear rises, love deeper. When vanity tempts, serve quieter. When shame whispers, remember the cross. When greed stirs, give generously. When hypocrisy creeps in, tell the truth even if it trembles. When self-worship returns, kneel. These are not rules, they are reflections of freedom. They are the ways the light breathes through human limitation. And at last, when your journey is over, and you stand before the final mirror, the one that divides time from eternity, you will not tremble. For you will know the face looking back is not the ghost of who you were, but the promise of who you have become. The haunted will have become the holy. The reflection will have become the radiance. And the light that once seemed outside of you will reveal itself to have been within you all along. Then you will understand that there was never anything to fear in the mirror. The fear was only the distance between illusion and truth. And when that distance is closed, there is only love, love unbroken, love eternal, love that sees and says, "It is good."